Welcome back to Plants Not Plastic. I'm Nikita and I bring you recipes that are delicious, inexpensive, simple, and healthy. I got a lot more into cooking when I switched to a plant-based diet 7 years ago, and I found that having certain items in your kitchen makes it a lot easier to be able to cook for yourself. So today I want to share my top recommended items with you. I've also been in other people's kitchens trying to cook, and not having a few pretty essential items makes cooking painful rather than something that you can enjoy. Before I jump into the list, I just want to say I am going to cover them in order from what I would consider the top recommended item to kind of my least recommended item, and then I'll even cover a few things that I don't think you need to have in your kitchen. I'm going to do it in that order because I really do think that you should spend about as much as you can afford for each of the items, and there's two reasons for that. The first is you'll be happy with the tool that you buy right from the beginning, and second, it'll last you a lot longer, so you won't end up having to spend more money to replace it down the line. For everything I mentioned, I also will have links down below if you want to go and take a look. First is one good chef's knife. Now you don't have to buy a whole set. You can do pretty much everything you need just with one knife. I have watched people struggle with dull knives. They're dangerous and they're a pain in the ass because you'll end up sawing your food rather than cutting it. If I go to someone's house and I know that I'm going to be cooking for the holidays, I will actually bring my knife with me because I will get to use it instead of the dull knives that I know are in somebody else's kitchen. I honestly can't stress enough, this is the #1 thing that you should have in your kitchen if you want to make cooking easier. When you're trying to look for a good chef's knife, you'll want to do something that actually feels the best to you. So for example, we have two chef's knives. This is the one my husband uses and this is the one I use. This one is 10 inches and it's just too big for me, so I prefer the 9-inch. That's what she said. When you're trying to pick out a chef's knife, you'll want to pick something that actually feels good in your hand. To test this, you'll want to hold it at the base of the blade. The heavier the handle, the more control you're gonna have when you're cutting. And I've heard chefs say that the higher the cost, generally the better the knife. So I said you don't have to buy a whole set. I actually did buy a full set 4 years ago when I bought this knife, but I only used 2 out of that entire set. This one and a serrated knife. So rather than spending a few $100s, I would say spend $80 to $150 on a really good chef's knife and save yourself the money. If you've gone so far as to buy yourself a really good knife, I would recommend getting a sharpening rod to go with it. This is something that you should use ideally before and after you use your knife. It will preserve the knife's edge and you won't have to get it sharpened as often. My God. Now that you have your knife, you want to buy a solid wood cutting board to go with it. So I've actually covered this in a previous video, but you want to get maple, teak, or acacia because those are the hardwoods that are going to be the best for your knife long term. I would say get as big of a surface as you can with it still fitting in your sink so that you can actually clean it. I also wouldn't recommend materials like glass or marble because the hard surface is going to ruin your knife's blade. If you can afford it, I would recommend getting 2 because one of them you'd want to use for your strong flavors like onion and garlic, and then others for things like fruit so that they don't absorb that flavor. If you can only afford 1 though, I would just recommend washing your cutting board as quickly as possible after you cut things like onion and garlic so that the wood doesn't absorb the flavor. Next is 1 large stainless steel pot. This is again something that you don't need to buy in a set. If you get 1 large pot, this one is 6 quarts, it should be good enough to be able to do all of the cooking that you need, be it rice or any batch cooked recipes like soups, stews, curries, pasta sauce, chili, all what you can do in just 1 pot together. If you're gonna buy a second cookware item, I would recommend getting a small to medium saute or saucepan. This can supplement your cooking for smaller items, like if you wanted to make a single round of mashed potatoes, or if you were cooking a smaller number of ingredients like sauces. And it's really just because having a smaller surface area is going to make your food less likely to burn. In general, getting something with a heavier base is going to have better heat transfer and it'll have a longer lifespan. We've had these for, I don't know how long, almost 8 years, I think. I've never had to buy another set. I also personally prefer glass lids because I can see what's going on inside the pot while I'm cooking. Next is a wooden spatula. Now, I recommend wood over other materials because it is sustainable, light, feels good in my hands, and it is gentle on my hands. Next is some kind of a prep bowl. I would recommend glass or ceramic because it has the most versatility. It can be heated up or cooled down, stuck in your microwave or your fridge. And if you really just want to go for one item, I would recommend getting a large storage container because you can do your prep, your serving, and your storage all in one. The next three I'm going to recommend kind of all in one, and that's a good can opener, a good peeler, and a good potato masher. These items aren't absolutely necessary, but they are going to make food prep and cooking that much easier. Next is measuring spoons and cups. Again, these aren't absolutely necessary, but it is going to be more difficult if you're measuring out rice or spices for baking. And if you get a good set, they'll last you for a really long time. If you just want one thing, you can get, well, I guess it would really be two things, but if you wanted, you could get just one glass measuring cup and then a set of measuring spoons. Baking is actually my favorite thing to do in the kitchen, and you don't need that much stuff to get started with it. So next, I would recommend for bakeware, getting one 8x4-inch baking pan, and then a standard size glass casserole dish. If you wanted to get a third item, because these things are not very expensive, you also could get like an 8x8 or a 9x9-inch baking pan so that you could do things like cakes or cornbread, and then a muffin tin would be the last thing that I would recommend so that you could make muffins or cupcakes. I have two other bonus items that I would recommend that aren't essential but will make stuff in your kitchen that much easier. The first of which is a salad spinner. You think you've seen in a previous video, if you have followed me, that I use this for doing my zero waste greens food prep. I'll use this for washing spinach and kale and then spinning it out to make sure that there's no water on it before I put it in the fridge. And then the other is a high-speed blender. And I recommend that just because lower quality or older blenders don't do quite as good of a job of blending things out smoothly. So if you're making something like my vegan cheese sauce, or puddings, or applesauce, or smoothies, you're just gonna have a harder time getting it to be as smooth as it should be. I'll also say that I have found that a smaller container like this one's 32 ounces, does a better job of blending things out smoothly, and I honestly don't even really use my larger blender attachment very often. I also wanna list off a few things that I think aren't necessary in your kitchen and you can just save yourself the money on. The first of which is a strainer, which I have one. We do use it every so often, but most of the time I just use the pot lid, or I'll even use my hand to rinse out cans of beans. So I actually don't use a strainer very often. If you're gonna buy one, I would say make sure that you get one that's easy to clean. We used to have one previously that had weird little feet on it, and we couldn't get it absolutely clean and eventually had to just throw it away. I also think that whisks, tongs, and zesters are absolutely unnecessary. I have a whisk that I've never used. I don't own tongs or a zester. And then last, I would say any level of like infomercial or cheap Amazon products, things like the apple slicer or like the 3-in-1 avocado peeler, pitter, and cutter. Unless you're gonna be using something like that over and over and over again, it makes more sense to just save yourself the money rather than having it end up in your cabinet collecting dust. So that's it for today. If you like this video, please do subscribe and click the bell to get notifications when I put out new content. You can also subscribe to my blog at PlantsNotPlastic.com, where I actually have a shop page with all of the things that I have in my kitchen. You can also follow me on social media. All the information is detailed below in the description. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.